a quorum. Let's go ahead and start. So how many people are online? We have 20 or so online.
19 right now.
And we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, plus another group of judges. So probably not quite 20 in the room. So that's not too bad. And is the speaker online? Alfonso.
Hello, yes, I'm online.
Great. So we're going to get going. We have announcements and elections, and then we'll get to you first, and then we'll do show and tell after that. Okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. Well, we can do it. Well, right. So folks, if you're not talking in the room or on the Zoom, can I ask you to go on mute? Thank you. And we're going to get started so it doesn't go late. If you can't hear me, let me know. I'm talking as loud as I think I usually would. So let's go ahead and bring up the announcement slide. So share screen. Okay. The green one. The big one says share screen. All right. And slideshow. And it works. Okay. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So first, a welcome to new members. We had actually it says 4, but there's 5. There's actually 6 because we have 2 new household members and 2 other new individual members. So Josh, Ashley, and Ian. And I don't know, Josh, if he's online. I don't know. I think you're a household, but we only have one name. Ariana and Jennifer. So welcome. We're going to do elections, and I think Valerie and Ron are here to hold the elections, and we'll do that in momentarily before the speaker, Dr. Alfonso Doucette, who I'll introduce later, who is joining us on Zoom from Madison, Wisconsin. And he also was very generous. He's talking about Pleurothallids, diversity and cultivation. He sent us a set of 20 Mazdavalias that he grew, and they're on the opportunity table over there. So thank you. And we'll do that at the end of the meeting with the raffle, along with gift certificates from Sunset Valley Orchids. 1 for those in the room and 4 for those online. So thanks for waiting to the end of the meeting for those. AOS judging, I have the usual posting. Lynn, are there any updates?
Yes, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, the first Wednesday of every month. So it's always the day after our San Francisco meeting. We have judging in conjunction with the Sacramento Orchid Society, and it's in Sacramento tomorrow.
Thank you. The next board/show committee meeting is going to be a week from yesterday, May 9th, Monday night, Zoom only, 7 p.m. So I'll send out invitations, and if you're interested, let me know if you haven't usually attended or don't get an invitation. The call-in is the same as what we use for this. So if you know the link and the password, SFOS 2022, it's the same for our meetings. So you can do it until we change it next year. Unless we have a problem. What else? Orchids in the Park coming up soon, July 30th and 31st. Still need people to help, but it's rumbling along, so doing well, planning wise. Joe and I and Faye and Heidi and Mishi and a few other folks are going to go on that European trip to Belgium and Netherlands for the Floriad trip. We leave at the end of the month. So we leave May 29th, and we don't get back until actually the day after the next meeting. on June 8th. So the next meeting is June 7th here. And Adam, who is on the slate as your new vice president, is going to be running the meeting next month. So please show up and help him. If you're considering coming in, come on in and be in person and help him out. There's an announcement for May 8th. There's a Peninsula Orchid Society Mother's Day show and sale from 10 to 4 in the San Mateo Garden Center with free admission. And the masking updates are the same as last time. It's recommended, but not required. So let me go to the next. We're recording. Did we start recording? Yeah. Okay. Right. So this is the flyer. It was in the newsletter. Let's see. Actually, are we recording? It says we're recording. I didn't hear the. Oh, okay. You're so sly. Okay. And then let's keep going. So now we'll do elections. So this is the slate.
Yes, hello. It's that time of year again. We get to do the elections, and here's the slate in front of you that the nominating committee has put forward. So their first order of business is to ask, are there any further nominations from the floor? I don't hear any. Do I hear a motion to close the nominations? Second. Anyone opposed? How about a motion to elect the slate by acclamation?
You
Yes.
don't need one. It's done.
And a second? Is there anyone opposed to that? Then it's very well quickly done. Congratulations, you're elected.
Thank you for all the continuing members and new ones for the
Yes,
board.
yes, yes.
And we need to make sure we know which Jeff is.
No, that was a sly move. I'm going to have the other Jeff take over. All right. Wahaha.
We'll have to get you T-shirts that say G or J.
All right, let me just look here in the chat, make sure there weren't any other things here. Who's that in the chat? All right. Claire. Okay, good, good. And Allison was here. Hi, Allison, welcome. Okay, so let me close chat. I can multitask. And we'll go ahead and this is moving right along. So, Dr. Alfonso Doucette describes the evolutionary relationships, morphology, cultivation, and where to buy orchids of the subtribe Pleurothallids, the largest and most rapidly diversing subtribe of orchids. He received his bachelor's in plant sciences at Cornell University and completed his PhD in botany at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he he is currently a customer success manager at San Francisco-based customer support software company Zendesk. Despite his career shift, he stays actively involved in botanical research and orchid cultivation. And he's sent in some beautiful pictures that were also on the website announcing the meeting, along with the newsletter, which are also pictured here, of a very lovely Lapanthes subotiae, I don't know how to say it, a Dracula vampira and a Rostrepia falkenbergii. So without further ado, I think you should be able to take over sharing screen, but let me make sure.
Great. Let's
Yes,
see.
we see you.
Yay. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, do you see that? Does it say Pleurothallids diversity and cultivation?
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you all today. San Francisco is a really special place for growing these orchids. Some of the best collections in the world of Mazdavalias and Draculas and Pleurothalids in general are in the Bay Area. So it's really an honor to speak to you all today. Oops. There's a little bit of a lag, sorry. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. I'm going to start by taking you through the evolutionary relationships. We're going to breeze through about 470 million years of evolution that brought us to the orchids that I'm going to speak about today. And then I'm going to go into the morphology. And I feel like this is useful just to understand what it is when you're looking at the plant. And I think it's also where a lot of the enjoyment comes from growing these orchids. They have such unusual shapes. And then I'll talk about their cultivation, how I'm growing them, some of my favorite tools and equipment that I use. And then we'll end with my favorite nurseries, which is where you can acquire these plants if you'd like to try growing them. Great. So 470 million years ago, the first embryophyte land plants emerge. And at least for me, I become super focused on orchids. I sometimes forget that they're actually plants and where that all came from. And, you know, originally plants started off as basically algae, just kind of like pond scum. And the first major evolutionary step that occurred to get us towards orchids eventually was the appearance of these plants called embryophytes. And what they were doing that's different from algae is that they were providing some more protection for the spores that they were creating. After that, fast forward to a couple 100 million years, that's when we start seeing the features that we recognize in land plants today. So things like roots and leaves start appearing about 390 million years ago. And at that time, that's when we start seeing things like liverworts, which grow on your orchids and mosses and things like that. And then about 200 million years ago, that's when flowering plants first evolved, which is where orchids belong. And within flowering plants, there's a couple of major groups, but orchids belong to a group called the monocots. And what distinguishes them from other groups of plants is that they have a single cotyledon, which is an embryonic leaf. So if you've ever grown a sunflower or a pumpkin from seed, you'll see those two little baby leaves showing up. Those are the cotyledons. In monocots, they just have a single one of those leaves, and orchids actually don't have that, but I'll talk about that in just a second. And then within the monocots, we've got a bunch of different groups, and orchids belong to the asparagales. This includes other things like asparagus, onions, and daffodils. And they're characterized by something called phytomelanin, which is a black pigment covering their seeds. But orchids actually lack this. Orchids are actually pretty bad parents when it comes to plants. They are distinguished from all other plants in having an embryo that does not develop past what's called the globular stage. So other plants will have an embryo that's formed in a little Y shape or a little line, something like that. Orchids don't even provide that much for their babies. It's just a lump of undifferentiated cells that they discard onto the wind, and they hope for a fungus to infect those babies, and then the seedling will parasitize that fungus until it can start photosynthesizing for itself. So orchids, terrible parents, and not surprisingly, they've produced some very unusual and interesting children. And some of those are the Pleurothalids, which appeared about 20 to 30 million years ago. And this group is distinguished by having an ovary that's articulated with the pedicel. So what that means is on a lot of inflorescences of orchids, you've got, you know, the main stem, and then you have a tiny little stem coming off of that main stem, and then the ovary, and then the flower. So in other orchids, that little tiny stem, which is called the pedicel, will fall off with the flower. In Pleurothalids, it stays on, and it just falls off with the ovary and the flower. So kind of trivial and random, but for whatever reason, that's what distinguishes this group. And then within the Pleurothalids, we've got these 6 major groups, and you might be familiar with some of these names that you're seeing here, like Mazdavalia and Pleurothalis and Restrepia. Within each of these clades, we've got a lot of diversity. And I'll go through that in just a little bit. I guess, are there any, I'm actually not sure how to handle questions. If you'd like, you can enter them into the chat. I'm not sure how it's going to work with the room, but maybe we can take questions from the room at the end. Normally, if I was in person, I'd have you interrupt me, but I think it might be a little easier to manage if we save them till the end. But those are the evolutionary relationships. You know, it took about 470 million years for the first embryophytes to appear, and then through that time, about 20 to 30 million years ago, that's when we start getting the orchids that we saw today. So deep time. Let's see. Oh, that's interesting. It's not fully loading, but there it goes. This is Poroglossum edwardi, and it's not the most typical pleurothalid, but it will be useful for illustrating the different parts of one of these orchids. It's kind of unusual because it's a lot more stretched out than a lot of the other orchids in this group, but it makes it useful for pointing out the different organs. So I'm sure you're all familiar with roots. These are the things that orchids use to attach themselves to plants. There's not a whole lot of diversity that we see in this group. Across orchids, you know, there is some more diversity. Phragmipediums have really hairy roots. I don't know, some orchids have branched roots. In Pleurothalids, they're pretty basic. They're generally unbranched. And the most variation you see is maybe they'll have green or kind of a ruby colored growing tip. The rhizome, you see some variation here too, mainly in the length. So you have some plants that are cespitose, which is clump forming. That's created by having very short rhizomes. And then you have other plants that have this kind of creeping habit, and those have the longer rhizomes. And then the stem in a lot of these is really abbreviated. So in this Poroglossum, which is part of the Mazdavalia clade, it's super reduced, and the plants are basically just a tuft of leaves and flowers. And then you've got the leaf, which is where photosynthesis occurs, and the inflorescence. And most of the inflorescences are a type called a raceme, which just means it's an unbranched inflorescence that's producing multiple flowers. And then the flower is where you know, we get the interesting bits. So here we've got the dorsal sepal and the lateral sepals, and in things like Cattleya is a good example. These are generally highly reduced. In Pleurothalids, these tend to be the most showy parts. And things like the petals and the lip are highly reduced, and some of them form traps. And generally what they're doing here is just guiding the pollinator against the reproductive organ. So here, this is the ovary. This is the piece that falls off from the pedicel, which is that structure I mentioned earlier. This is what's going to turn into the fruit. And then we have the column and the anther cap. So if you want to pollinate one of your Mazdavalias or your Restrepias, this is the structure that you're looking for. I like to use a toothpick. I'll wet the tip, and then you can dislodge the anther cap here, and you can place the pollen, which is under the anther cap, right here under the base, and that's where the stigmatic surface is. It's generally a sticky, slightly shiny depression. Right there. And then the column foot, this is just an extension that holds the lip. Great. And then this is the first group that we'll talk about. This is my favorite group. It's also the most horticulturally important group within the Pleurothalids. It has the most registered orchid hybrids, and they tend to produce the largest and showiest flowers. So within this Mazdavalia clade, we have Tricetella, which is the most ancient lineage in the group. And these are very small plants that are distributed throughout the Andes. And actually, the whole Mazdavalia clade, they're only found in Central and South America. Some of the other groups that we'll talk about also make it into the Caribbean, but this group is largely restricted to the neotropics. So we've got Tricetella, we have Dracula, which some of you might be familiar with. Sometimes they're commonly called monkey orchids because they have a little face like structure in the center of the flowers. And these ones generally produce descending inflorescences. So it's common to grow those in a basket. And then we have Poroglossum, and these are a really interesting group of orchids because they're sort of the Venus flytrap equivalent of orchids. They have a touch-sensitive lip, that if you brush with your finger or a toothpick, after a few seconds, it'll snap shut. And then there's Mazdavalia, and that is the largest group. It's about 600 species. In total, this clade includes about 800 species, but Mazdavalia is the largest. It's also one of the most diverse. And this is where you see a lot of brightly colored species. This is an illustration of a Mazdavalia coccinea. That's a beautiful Colombian species with pink, crimson, white, and yellow flowers. And then here are some of my favorites. The A right here, this is Dracula vampira. This plant actually came from a grower from the San Francisco area named John Leathers, and it's a really beautiful form of that species. And these can get about 15 inches long from tail tip to tail tip. So a lot of times when people think of Pleurothallids, they think of, really small flowers that aren't very showy. Dracula, you have some gigantic flowers. They discovered a Dracula chimera that actually measured 1 meter from tail tip to tail tip in Colombia. So they can get, they can rival the world's largest flowers. And then, you've got these other smaller sorts of unusual things. This is a pink form of Poroglossum hosei. I actually got this one too from a grower in the Bay Area, and this is a piece of the holotype. And it's got this really unusual kidney-shaped dorsal sepal. And then this little dark mark is where the lip is, and that's the structure that you can touch and it'll snap shut. It's kind of cool to watch. And then C, that's Mazdavalia prodigiosa. This is one of my favorites. It's also pretty inexpensive. It's about 12 bucks from Equigenera. And, I find that they're not that difficult to grow. They flower, they're actually just starting to end flowering for me. So they flower in the spring. You'll have other species like this Poroglossum that can flower year round. So one of my favorite things about the Mazdavalia clade is that you do have species here that can always be in flower. So they're cool for that reason. And you've got a lot of variation in the colors. You have ones that are almost black, like this Dracula vampira. You have reds, oranges, lots of variety there. We also have a diversity of patterns. You can see this Dracula vampira is striped. There's also lots of spotted ones. And then these can be fuzzy or smooth or crested, lots of textures there. And if you're interested in fragrances, this is also a good clade to focus on because there's a really surprising diversity of fragrance. Some of them, Poroglossum uxorium, which you can get from Andy's Orchids. That one to me smells like black licorice. There's also some other species of Poroglossum and Mazdavalia that smell like cloves. Poroglossum marinoi and Mazdavalia unguentum are examples of that. There's some that to me kind of smell like roses. Mazdavalia lauschiana is one of those. To me, some can smell like violets. There's one called Mazdavalia richardsoniana, and this is a very unusual fragrance. I would say it's either like violets or I don't know if you've ever sneezed really hard and then you have like a sweet kind of smell. It's maybe just a strange thing that I've experienced, but that's what Mazdavalia richardsoniana smells like to me. And then you have, some more pleasant things. This Mazdavalia prodigiosa, I think they smell kind of like apricots. It's a really pretty fragrance. And then you have some really foul smelling ones that smell like butyric acid, which is a nice way of saying throw up. So fantastic group. I would say, this is the most horticulturally important group for a reason. Lots of really great diversity. And then another group that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with is the Pleurothalis clade. This is where the subtribe gets its name. Pleurothalis means many ribs, and it's a fancied allusion to the appearance of the plants growing on the sides of trees with all of these stems that the author thought made them look like a bunch of ribs. So most of the diversity is within this Stelis sensu-latu clade. The genus Stelis actually includes about half of all of the species. There's about 2,000 species total, and over 1,000 of them are just in this genus Stelis. And a surprising number of them look basically the same. And in this group, so before we saw the Mazdavalias, they have those really short stems. Here we start seeing an elongation of those stems. And something we'll see a little bit later, which is kind of interesting, and I guess, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but In the earlier groups of Pleurothalids, we see that they have a bunch of segments in their stems. And in these more recently derived groups, they only have just a few segments. So the interesting thing that you can use to kind of distinguish some of these ancient ones from some of the newer ones is when they evolved long stems again, they didn't evolve all of those segments again. So they lost all those segments and some of them re-evolved long stems, but they didn't invent that again. So it's just kind of interesting there. Another thing that we see repeated frequently throughout the clades here, except in the genus Mazdavalia, is the miniaturization of plants. So here we can see this, this is the genus Pleurothallis, and here we have Specklinia sensulatu. This is an Andenia. These plants have been really reduced, and they're these tiny little creeping mat forming sorts of things. And it's interesting because we see this evolve again and again throughout the tree. And this has also led to some of the confusion of earlier taxonomists and being able to distinguish these groups, because you have something called convergent evolution. And what that is when you have different selective pressures on a lineage that is making two unrelated lineages look more similar. But they look more similar because they've been under similar selection pressures rather than actually being related. So something kind of interesting there. And then in this group, this is another group that you can have some seasonal flowering to things that are always in flower. There's also some diversity in flower color here. I'll say these flowers are definitely not as large as some of the things that occur in the Mazdavalia clade, but they're very interesting. They're small and they're intricate. This group also doesn't have the same diversity of fragrances the Mazdavalia group does, but there are, some fragrances. There's a few species that smell like rotting fruit. There's one, I think it's called, I'm forgetting the name, Pleurothalis, I want to say Umeco Colon. And that one has a very, very sweet fragrance. So these small white flowers that produce a really pungent, very sweet odor. So those are kind of interesting. And then these are some of my favorite species here. A is Pleurothalis sphaerantha. This is something you can probably pick up from Andy's orchids or equigenera. And this has heart-shaped leaves that produce these little flowers in the center of them. And the genus Pleurothalis, it has a lot of different species in them. Some of them can, the plants can get pretty large, like over 2 feet tall, probably approaching 3 feet tall. And they've got these big heart-shaped leaves, but if you want something smaller, this Pleurothalis sphaerantha stays under 5 inches tall. So it's a nice option if you have limited space. This Pleurothalis, this used to be Pleurothalis. This Stelis carnisolabia is a species from Panama that you can, equigenera will carry this species sometimes. And these flowers are non-resupinate. So orchid flowers are unusual because they're all upside down relative to how other flowers normally develop. This species is doubly upside down. So it's upside down for an orchid, which is already upside down for a flower. So I guess it's right side up. But the orientation of these is unusual. And the lips, this is where the name comes from, carnosilabia, it means fleshy lip. They're very thick and they've got some grooves in them. They actually look kind of like little mushrooms. So could be a mushroom mimic, very strange. This is Muscarella megalops. You'll see this is Pleurothalis megalops very often. This is a great species that produces large flowers relative to the size of the plants. Plants are about 3 inches tall. The flowers are about 1 inch long. And it produces a bunch of them. They're kind of spidery. They hang below the flowers. This is a Pleiophylla alfonsiana. This is one that I actually picked up at an orchid show in Minnesota from J&L Orchids. And it turned out to be something undescribed, which was kind of exciting. And J&L Orchids, which some of you may have heard of before, is a pretty significant orchid nursery for the history of Mazdavalias and Pleurothallids. A lot of species have been described from their collection. So Dracula lotax is a very common species that people will grow. It's a little bit warmer growing. That was originally described from their collection. There's a very cute Tricetella called Tricetella cordeliae that was also described from their collection. And their collection was developed before CITES. So they were going into South America and collecting things, and it was a lot easier to import things. So there were a lot of great things in their collection. And this is maybe one of the last things that was described from their collection before it was sold, I believe, to a botanical garden in Taiwan. But they're still around. They just don't have the original collection. Great. And then this is the Lapanthes clade. This is another really big clade. It's got about 14,000 species. And sister to the rest of the group is this genus called Zootrophion. These are sort of unusual because the flowers never fully open. There's one species that's pretty big. It's probably over 2 feet tall. It's called Zootrophion aguirrei, and it only opens in a tiny little aperture at the base of the flower. So very, very strange. I don't know if it's maybe mimicking a fig or what, but it's basically a flower that's very thick and fleshy that only opens in a tiny little hole. So, you know, mostly just a curiosity. Anathalis is a group of species that were originally in Pleurothalis, and it was a big surprise that they came out in this group because the morphology is so unusual. Most of these, you can see the stems, they have a lot of segments in them. I was talking earlier about how all of that segmentation in the stems was lost. And for flowers for species that reappeared with those long stems, they just had just a few nodes in those stems. So those are one of those where you have this miniaturization of the plants, and then some of those species develop those long stems again. They lost all those segments, and you know, maybe for that reason people were lumping them into Pleurothalis. But the DNA showed us that they're actually more closely related to this Lapanthes group, and this is another one of those examples of convergent evolution. And something you see throughout this group is something called Lapanthiform sheaths. So you'll see in some of these illustrations, they've got sort of funnel-shaped sheaths on the stem, and that's something that's unique to this group. My particular favorite here is the genus Lapanthes, and we can see some here. B and D are two really popular species in this group, and what's unusual about them is they are similar to the Ophrys of Europe. They mimic female insects and produce a pheromone that's similar to them. And in this case, it's a fungus gnat, and the little gnat will fly into the flower and it'll try to copulate with it. And that's how they become pollinated. And B, this is Lapanthes calodictyon. The name means beautiful net. And you can see that it got that name from this reticulated pattern on the leaves. And these are really cool just for the foliage. They have sort of cup-shaped leaves that have that net pattern on them. And it might be hard to see in the photo, but the margins of these leaves, they have an undulate margin. So it's a really cool wavy margin. And I've seen some clones of this species that are really tightly cupped and they have really frilly edges. It's a pretty unusual thing. And below that, we have Lapanthes telepogoniflora. This whole plant is under 3 inches tall, and they've got these huge flowers that dwarf the plant. This is another one of those species, the Lapanthes calodictyon too, that can be in flower all year round. I would say, I would guess probably like 90% or more of the Lapanthes species, those will be in flower all year round if they're happy. And then we've got some other things here. This is a Trichosalpinx, Trichosalpinx intricata. Got that one from Peru Flora. It was labeled as Lepanthopsis apota, but it was not. And this is another one of my favorites. This is Anathalis bocanensis. This is from Brazil. And this is another one of those that has that unusual fragrance I was describing earlier that Mazdavalia richardsoniana had, of what I think is like a sweet sneeze smell. Really strange, also a very floriferous plant. This is a first bloom seedling, so it didn't have a lot of flowers on it, but these plants will produce lots of flowers. Let's see, yeah. And then, yeah, in general, this group, it's not a whole lot of fragrance going on here, but really, really interesting flowers and a lot of species that are in bloom all year long. And then we've got the Restrepia clade, and this is another one of those groups. We're starting to get a little lower in the tree into some of the more ancient lineages. These have those multiple nodes on the stems. These are also generally producing just a single flower. There are some lineages like Acyanthera that produce a raceme, which has multiple flowers, but most of these are just producing one. And I'd say the most popular genus in this group is probably Restrepia. They produce pretty large flowers for this group, and they're produced generally in abundance. A lot of these will also have seasonal flowering, so it's not going to be like the Lapanthes or some of the Mazdavalias that will always be in flower. These also tend to be kind of smelly. So we learned about butyric acid earlier, which is kind of the vomit smell. They can also smell like calorie pear, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with those pear trees that they'll sometimes plant along streets that have white flowers and a really unpleasant odor. Those are calorie pears. Some of these will smell like that. Other than that, you know, some of them are very beautiful. Unfortunately, the Restrepias, a lot of them will smell like calorie pear, but they have really, really pretty and showy flowers. So if you don't have a sensitive nose, you know, this might be a good option. And let's see, it doesn't quite load for me. And then this is the Octameria clade. This is another one of those more ancient lineages. We see the appearance of, you know, this really tiny sort of growth habit that we see kind of evolving multiple times throughout the group. And then we have a very unusual genus called Brachionidium. These have a reputation for being impossible to grow. I'm not sure why they are so difficult, but they are very difficult. They just don't like cultivation. I've kept, you'll see them for sale every now and then. I've purchased some before from Peru Flora. Equigenera in the past has sold some of these. I got a Brachionidium polypodium, which we can see on the next slide here. That's the A right here from Finca Dracula. I was working with them during my graduate school, and I imported plants from them. And I've kept my plant alive for, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years now. I was also able to get it to produce seed, which I flask, and I've got some seedlings. They're really slow growing, but I don't know, if you want a challenge, Brachionidium is certainly, you know, offers that challenge. Like I said, they're for sale very rarely, but Peru Flora, I've seen them for sale there. Equigenera, I've seen them offer them for sale in the past. But, you know, if you want something that has a reputation for being impossible to grow, this is them. The only tips I have is that they appear to not like being disturbed very much, but they also don't like being in the medium for too long. So you can't have them. I remount them about once a year. And I'll go into this in a little more detail, but I mount other things a lot more frequently. I think if you can get like kind of a critical mass of the plant, they seem to do well, at least this species, because they have a lot of roots that they'll send off of the stems, and you'll have this nice kind of like, I don't know, like upside down bush sort of growth habit. So very cute, very difficult to grow. That is the Octameria clade. And then, you know, for whatever reason, these have 6 to 8 pollinia. After that, there's a reduction to 4 in that Restrepia clade, and then lineages that evolved after them lost them, and it's generally just 2 pollinia there. And then this is the Dilemmilus clade. This is one of the most enigmatic groups, really is not commonly cultivated. These are all restricted to the Caribbean. I would say Neoconoea is probably the most frequently cultivated of this group. And the reason for that is they've got these really spectacular scarlet colored flowers. So to me, these are is pretty, more pretty because they're Pleurothallids than Sophronites. They're really fantastic, but they're also, for whatever reason, very difficult to grow. I have seen these being reproduced by seed, and hopefully people keep reproducing them by seed. And, you know, maybe we can get a situation like Paphiopedilum delinadii, where I think that's one of these cases where, actually, no, I think they discovered more, and then the ones that they discovered later were easier to grow. But what I'm hoping is that they can get Neoconoeas through a couple rounds of a couple generations, and hopefully those will become easier to grow because they are really beautiful. They also stay fairly small. This species, Neoconoea hexaptera, stays under about 5 inches tall. The other species is Neoconoea monophylla, which I've seen for sale by Andy's Orchids occasionally. Those are a little bigger, but they stay under, I would say, 10 inches tall. See here, Thomsononia phyllicina. This is a species that's endemic to Haiti, and I actually went to Haiti to try and collect this. Unfortunately, we didn't find it, but Haiti was, a real adventure. It's amazing that there are any orchids left. If you look at satellite images of the island of Hispaniola, it includes Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Haiti is yellow, basically, because there's been so much deforestation. And I went to the type locality for the species, and there was also, it was in a national park, but there were still farms basically everywhere. And where you still find orchids are on these rocky outcroppings of limestone, and found a lot of species, lots of Lapanthes, which is in that Lapanthes clade, some miniature Pleurothalis species, but we didn't find this Thomsononia, which is potentially extinct, hopefully not, but it's very rare, very unusual. It's kind of like a platypus of the group. It's got this weird combination of characters. It's got a branching stem and lots of leaves on it, like you might see in some species of maybe like an epidendrum or a scaphoglottis, which is sister to these, but then they've got this little kind of Octameria Pleurothallid-like flower. So kind of weird for those reasons. And yeah, so this is a mysterious group that, isn't frequently cultivated, but they're strange. And, if you find one, I'd encourage you to try and grow it. So that's the evolutionary relationships. We saw some of the morphology. I think, my personal favorite in the whole group is that Mazdavalia clade. That's where you see, the most diversity of color, fragrance, big flowers. I think you get, a lot of bang for your buck there. And then for the temperature ranges, the way that I like to think about this is relative to the elevation that they come from. And fortunately, you can find a lot of this information online. What I'll frequently do is I will just type in the genus and the species that I'm interested in, and then IOSPE. It's the Internet Orchid Species Photo Encyclopedia, IOSPE. And they've got tons of records with lots of elevation data. So, as I'm looking through, an online catalog, it's species I might be interested in growing, or something that I've already acquired, I'll check to see what the elevation is online, and that'll tell me whether it's going to be something that I want to grow warmer, intermediate, or cold. And then these are, just some of my favorite species here that match to those different temperatures. And the way that I'm growing a lot of these is in wine coolers. I published an article this year in the January edition of Orchids magazine that I encourage you to take a look. And if anyone wants to email me, I'm happy to send you a PDF version of that article. It provides a list of all of the equipment that you need in order to modify a wine cooler to grow these orchids, and also steps for setting it up. So the great thing about this is that if you're living in an apartment, if you already have a greenhouse that you've dedicated to worm growing plants, whatever, if you just want to have, some Mazdavalias in your living room, you can set one of these up, and they are pretty low maintenance. And, it's really changed my ability to grow these plants at home because I do not have a greenhouse. I am basically growing in these. And the basic components are the wine cooler itself. I hang them on hardware cloth. That's something that you can buy on Amazon or Home Depot. You can see in this photo here on the left that there is egg crate. I would not recommend using that. It becomes very brittle over time and it breaks and falls off, and that's not something you want. I have hardware cloth that I purchased in college, so I don't know, 15 years ago, and I'm still using it. So the hardware cloth is very long lasting. I would also recommend setting the wine cooler in a tray to collect the runoff. When I very first started with this, I maybe stupidly did not realize that there was going to be overflow of water from this, and it will stain your carpet. Probably not good for your wood floors either. But you can get a tray like they would have for a washing machine at Target or also on Amazon. All of the stuff that I use for this, I've purchased all of it through Amazon or Best Buy for the wine coolers. So you don't even have to leave your house if you want to pick these things up. But The tray to collect runoff, highly recommended because these will leak. And then I'll set those on top of bricks just to keep the wine cooler elevated. I don't know, this is something that I did later, but I did keep a wine cooler in one of these trays without the bricks. It was sitting in the water. I don't know, it didn't break, but I feel like that's probably not good for it. So I'd recommend putting it on top of bricks. And then I use a turkey baster to drain the water from the tray. This is really going to depend on how heavily you water. I feel like I've gotten to a point where I really don't have to do this anymore. But in the beginning, I was watering a lot, maybe more than I needed to. And I'd have to use a turkey baster, and I'd just get an empty gallon jug and suck it up and get rid of that excess water. And then in the lower right picture here, the red square is around a cable box. This is also something you can buy on Amazon, and you have different wires running in here, and it's just a way to tidy that so you don't have to see the mess. And what really makes this work is a temperature controller. So this is what I use to drop the temperature. So the wine cooler, you can set the temperature, but if you want it to be warmer, then maybe you can set the wine cooler for, because maybe you're in the Bay Area, you want to grow things that like to be 80 degrees in the daytime. You can do that with one of these temperature controllers. And there are different models. This particular one has a photocell, so you can set a day temperature and a night temperature. So I'm dropping them, I forget now, but it's either 10 or 15, I think it's 10 degrees. I dropped them 10 degrees at night. And interestingly, I had a house fire, lots of stuff was destroyed. I had a small group of plants that I was keeping immediately after the house fire, and it was a mix of worm growers and cool growers. And I found that they all did pretty well at 68 degrees. Some of them, didn't do as well when I grow them colder or warmer, but 68 seemed to be a magic temperature for whatever reason. So if you want to have a mixed collection, that might be a temperature that you try. And the other thing I found is that I don't know how important it is to have a drop in nighttime temperature. They definitely seem to appreciate it. But I also keep orchids in my basement, and there is no difference in day and nighttime temperature there. And they seem to do just fine. I've got Dracula vampira down there, Mazdavalia prodigiosa, bunch of Lapanthes. It doesn't seem necessary to have that drop in nighttime temperature, but I do it in the wine coolers. Just it seems to be a best practice. Don't know if it's necessary. Yeah, so we've got that. Let's see. Oh, I see. These red boxes are illustrating the photocell right there, and then this is so you actually plug the wine cooler into the device, and then you have a sensor that you thread into the wine cooler. And when I very first built these, I drilled a hole in the side of the wine cooler. That's not necessary. It takes a long time. You end up with jagged metal on the side. It's very unpleasant. And afterwards I discovered that I can just run them through the side of the wine cooler. So you just open up the door, you have that gap there, you can run the cords for your lights, the temperature sensor, everything through there. You don't have to drill a hole. So something I found out later. And I also like to have a humidity and temperature thermometer in there. This is one that I bought on Amazon. What I like about it is it holds the highs and the lows for a few days. I think it's either 3 or 5 days that it'll hold that. And this is just a useful way to keep track of what the conditions are in your wine cooler or your growing area. I had a fan break in one of these one time, and I didn't replace it for a long time. And then I put in one of these humidity measuring devices, and maybe not surprisingly, but the top was very, very dry. and the bottom was very humid. So that's kind of what made me discover that the fans are important for air circulation. That's going to result in an even distribution of humidity and temperature throughout the wine cooler. And I'll move these periodically, just, you know, to the top of the wine cooler and in the lower part, just to make sure I'm hitting the temperatures I'm expecting. And then, you know, on the subject of fans, these I leave running 24/7, and these last me years. I would guess, you know, more than 5 years. These fans last me. I'll also use, you know, it's maybe common sense, maybe not, but a small fan for a small chamber. So for these wine coolers that I've got that are maybe about 3 feet tall, I'll use a 1 inch by 1 inch fan. And those are USB fans, and I plug them into a power strip that I've got with USB ports. And then for the larger wine coolers that I've had in the past that are maybe 5 or 6 feet tall, and also in the larger enclosures that I've got in my basement, I've got these you know, bigger 3-inch fans. And this brand is cool because you can adjust the rate, so you can make them faster or slower. And that's you know, a feature that I like there. And the way that I attach these is, you'll see they have these little holes in each of the corners. I'll take some wire, and then I'll just wire that through the fans, and I'll either attach it to the hardware cloth or to the rack that I have hanging from the top of the wine cooler. And for these, the way that I'm positioning the fans in the wine cooler is at the top, blowing down. I think that's probably just the best for the air circulation. And for lights, I have found that Pleurothallids, most of the species, I would say, I'll just guess 90% of the species, are not super particular about lights. In college, I was growing them under just shop lights from Home Depot that were not even made for plants, and they were growing and blooming fine. Most recently, I've discovered these Amazon Ming Dock LED lights that are made for aquariums. And what I like about these is that they have these extensible sides. So you can just extend that and it'll fit right into the wine cooler. There are these grooves in the wine cooler where the racks are held, and it'll just slide right in there. So they're very convenient for that reason. And should have got a glass of water. I found that the light was falling out. So what I did is I put some electrical tape on the base there, and that has solved that issue. So this is, you know, a handy light with this very cool feature of these extensible feet on it that is very convenient. Let's see if there's anything else here. Yeah. Oh yeah. And I've switched entirely over to LEDs, and the reason for that is just, you know, you have to replace fluorescent bulbs pretty frequently. I have LEDs running for a couple of years now, and doesn't seem like I need to replace them yet. And you know, this is probably pretty basic, but I love having a spray canister. I know there's some people that will soak their orchids or use a spray bottle. I like just getting a gallon spray canister and, you know, doing my watering that way. And for these orchids, I'm watering them daily. I probably don't have to. You can probably get away with watering them maybe 3 or 4 times a week. Pleurothallids definitely like to be wet though, most of the species. So I think a good way to judge how much water they're gonna like is how fleshy the leaves and the roots are. If they've got really juicy, succulent leaves, it's something that you can probably grow without moss. And if it's something that has really coarse roots, it's something that you can probably not water as frequently. The things that have very thin leaves and, you know, these really tiny thin roots, those are the ones that like to be wet constantly. Let's see, got that. And then for fertilizer, and you know what, I can't remember if I put in a slide for it, but I'll just call out using reverse osmosis water. That's something that changed my life. Before I was using RO water, I was either purchasing distilled water or stealing gallons of it from the lab that I worked in graduate school. And that's, you know, very inconvenient because water is heavy. Water can spill. Do not put it in your backpack, especially if you have a laptop. And having an RO system at home has been life-changing for that reason, because, I can just go to my sink, I have an adapter there, I can fill up a gallon of water. And, it's the type of water that these orchids need. These orchids come from cloud forests, so they are constantly being hit by clouds. And there's very low nutrients and not a lot of salts there. So they are sensitive to water quality. So I would highly recommend RO. The fertilizer that I'm using is an MSU fertilizer. I mix about a quarter teaspoon per gallon of water, and I'm watering them, or I'm fertilizing them every week. And in between that, I'm using RO water. And then for mounting these plants, so the plants that I shared with your society today, these are mounted on these plastic sheets. This is something that I've started doing. So when I was a teenager, I had the great fortune of basically interning at Andy's Orchids, and that's where I learned to mount orchids. And at the time, he was using cedar shingles. And for a really long time, I was using cedar shingles as well. I think they're pretty good. I would say the advantages that plastic sheets have over them is you can cut them with a strong pair of scissors. So you don't have to saw them like you would for cedar shingles. And the real reason I started using them is the roots don't stick to them. So I remount pretty frequently, and it really breaks my heart when I have a plant that is growing really well and it's got lots of roots, and it's just not possible to pry all of them off, and I just have to pull it off. And there's lots of damage. That is not the case with these plastic sheets. And it makes sense. They are plastic. So I grow on the smooth side. They have kind of a textured side and a smooth side. The roots peel right off. And the reason I thought of this is I didn't want to buy more cedar shingles because they were expensive. And I was thinking that, we grow orchids in plastic pots. So why not just grow them on plastic sheets? And I found that, it works great. Oh, there we go. And then the other thing that I do, this I've been doing for longer than I've been growing on the plastic sheets. But when I first learned to mount orchids, it was with fishing line, and I think a lot of people use fishing line. I think it does the job, but it can be really challenging when you're working with some of these really tiny orchids that I grow some of them on 1 inch by 1 inch size mounts. The fishing line can give you some resistance. It can also be hard to tie the knots. I find that nylon thread is much easier to use, and I use it from everything from the little Mazdavalia bangii that I shared with your society, to things like Dracula vampira, which those leaves can be 15 inches tall. Those plants are big, and I can keep those securely mounted with nylon thread. So it's really versatile. It's easy to tie. And it also does not decompose. Cotton threads will. So just to be mindful of that if you decide to use thread. And then for the growing media, I am almost exclusively growing in moss. Everything I have mounted is growing in moss. If there are alternatives, I'm interested. I am remounting every 6 months. So what I found with the Pleurothallids, I mentioned earlier the Brachionidium, it doesn't like to be remounted too frequently. It also doesn't like to be remounted too infrequently. With the Pleurothallids, especially things like Lapanthes, they seem to start to decline, I would say after about 9 months. And I'm not sure exactly what it is. It could be that as the moss is decomposing and it becomes more acidic, there are certain elements and nutrients that become more difficult for the plant to acquire because of the pH. And I think the roots die for that reason. But after so long, Pleurothallids seem to lose their roots. So I've found that 6 months is, kind of the sweet spot for remounting everything. And I'm keeping track of that in Google Sheets. So I set up a formula so that it will highlight the name of the plant as green whenever it's reached 6 months. And I'll just take a look at that every weekend, and I just, kind of work through and remount those plants every 6 months. And Google Sheets helps me manage that. The other thing that I'll use for things in pots is seedling grade bark. And I've also been experimenting with coconut, chopped up coconut recently. It seems to also be fine. I'm not sure about the longevity, but it seems to work. Great. So we've covered the evolutionary relationships, the morphology, cultivation, and now we can go on to some of my favorite sources for plants. So I mentioned earlier, I got my start at Andy's Orchids. Andy's Orchids is near and dear to my heart. They have an amazing collection. If you haven't visited them in person, they do a lot of open houses, and it's beautiful. It's really amazing just to walk through their greenhouse. It's full of plants, and he's got a lot of species and a lot of really rare things. This is another one of those collections. I mentioned J&L Orchids. They started collecting their plants, pre-CITES. Andy also did the same thing. So when he was, a kid in, I don't know, the 80s, 70s, I don't know how old he is, but it was before CITES. He traveled around Central and South America, and a lot of those orchids that he collected before CITES are still a part of his collection, and he's been dividing those for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So a lot of very special things. He's also got this great power search function on his website. So if there's a particular genus you want to look up, you can. If there's, particular lighting, a particular temperature, particular watering regimen, you can also filter the species by that. So I like his website for that reason. And then the other thing is, he's, like I said, he's got this very big collection. If there are things that are not on his website that you're looking for, it's, worth giving him a phone call just to see if he's got it. The other resource I like, this is kind of a San Francisco-based operation. This is run by Gary Mayer, who's a Dracula expert that some of you may know. He runs Colombian Orchid Imports, and he means for this to be a connection between US growers and Colombian orchid nurseries, and he will do shipments twice a year. So he has a mailing list that you can sign up for, and he'll let you know when he's taking orders. And this is a great way to get things from some of these famous orchid nurseries in Colombia, like Colombo Orquídeas, Orquifollajes, Orquídeas del Valle. He's able to access those, and he's got a list of the species that he can get for you there. So good option there. I would recommend starting with a place like Andy's Orchids if you have not grown this group of orchids before. And the reason for that is when you're importing orchids, it's very stressful for them. So they're coming in pretty rough shape. So that's something to be mindful of. And then the other nursery that I really like and that I work pretty closely with, I'm going to be down there next month in June, working with them on species descriptions, is Equigenera. And they have a massive collection of Mazdavalias and Lapanthes and Draculas and all of those things. I think they've got 300 or 400 species of Mazdavalia available on their website. So this is definitely a great place to pick up those species. But like I mentioned before, these are being imported. So they may arrive in rough shape. They do attend orchid shows. So if it's something that you want to pick up at, like the Pacific Orchid Expo, something like that, you can place the order, pick it up at the show. If the plants don't look so great, you can probably work something out with them. And then finally, I feel like this is maybe kind of the most advanced option. We were talking about some of that morphology of the flower before, how you can take the pollen, you can put it on the stigma to produce seeds. I do all of my flasking through Mayer's Conservatory. They're based out of Washington. And what's great about Troy Mayer's is they have a special flasking program for species where if he can make at least 3 flasks to sell to the public, you get a free flask. So it's a great way to do that. I will say it's one of those more advanced sorts of things because it can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get seedlings back. And the reason for that is the development and sometimes the germination can just take a really long time. And then you have to wait for, those seeds to reach blooming size. One of the good things about this group of orchids is that they have a fairly rapid generation time. So in 3 years from seed to getting the plant total, you can have blooming sized plants. Some things like Lapanthes will actually bloom in the flask. So this is an option here. And then this is also a place where you can reserve flasks. So if there's something that you're interested in, you can do notifications by genus. They have lots of things like Paphipetalums and Fragmipediums, Mexipedium I've seen on there as well. You can have notifications for that. And this is also where I'm submitting my seeds. So it's a good option. And that's everything I've got for you. Thank you again, for having me. It's an honor to speak to the San Francisco Society. Like I mentioned, some of the, best collections of these orchids in the world are in the Bay Area. And available to you today, I sent some Mazdavalia naranja pate. This is a very rare species. One of my friends in the Bay Area had one of these that mysteriously disappeared from his greenhouse. So this is your opportunity to get one of these. And it's also a warmer grower. So we've got a warm growing option, which is this Mazdavalia naranja pate, and then a cooler growing option. So we've got Mazdavalia bengii too. And the Mazdavalia naranja pate, these plants, the plants I sent over are probably about 3 inches tall. They won't get too much bigger, but really big established plants can be about like 5 inches tall. So kind of medium sized. And then the Mazdavalia bengii, these are miniatures. These will stay under 3 inches tall. So those are the two options for you today. And I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has. I'm not sure about the best way to do that, but happy to try.
Thank you. This is great. So, Alfonso, I have we have everything set up in the room, and I'm kind of passing some of them around so people can see what he was talking about, the way he mounts them.
Oh, great.
They're all over there on this table. I was amazed when I got a little cooler and he had 20 of these in there, and they're so beautifully wrapped. So thank you. Any questions in the room here?
Jeff, that's what I was going to ask. What do they look like mounted on plastic with this nylon?
I'll show you on the camera.
Great, thank you.
Stop sharing and I'll bring it.
And speak into the microphone, Jeff.
Let's see, and feel free to pop questions into the chat. So let's see. So I see a question from Ron. In your wine cooler, how many and spacing of lights? So I only have one light. I only have one of those LED lights that I mentioned. And so with the wine coolers I've got that are about 3 feet tall, it's fine just having the one light in there. For ones that get taller, the ones that are like 5 feet tall, what I've done is I've suspended the light fixtures vertically so that there's even illumination throughout the wine cooler. The only downside to that is that if you want to grow plants for judging, I would not recommend doing that because they will be very wonky because they'll all be growing towards the light. So you can have some kind of like weird growths if you're suspending them vertically. But if you're just growing them for your own pleasure, that's a good way to get a lot of vertical space in there. The best place for cheap wine coolers. So I have not, I've never bought like a used wine cooler, but I imagine if there's a place to get used wine coolers, that would be an option. The wine coolers that I've got that are about 3 feet tall, those were, I think, $300. And I've got pricing in that article that I published in Orchids magazine in January this year. So there's a full breakdown of all of the components for the wine cooler and the pricing there. But a small wine cooler will be, about $300.
Any other questions on Zoom?
I was wondering, why do you remount every 6 months rather than more like 9 or a year?
Well, for me, I just do it kind of like in the spring and fall. So it just kind of, works out for the season for that reason. And I don't have a good reason for it. I just, kind of like doing it twice a year rather than doing it every 9 months. I guess it wouldn't be a problem because I have my spreadsheet set up to remind me when to remount the plants. So it's very arbitrary, I guess. I'm just doing it every 6 months. But I would say more than 9 months if you're growing them mounted in the sphagnum moss. At least under my conditions, they don't seem to like that, especially some of these really small, delicate sorts of things.
Okay. Any other questions in the chat or anywhere else? Let's see here. Cheap wine coolers. Bartle and James? No. Wait, wrong. Just kidding. Okay.
That's
get it.
cheap wine.
We have, so Lynn, are you ready to do show and tell, or?
I am,
we
I
wait?
have to go through my usual.
Yeah, why don't we're gonna do the one in the room. So Alfonso, if you want to stay on, that would be fine. We actually have, I brought in a Poroglossum nudita that's in bloom. That has the
Nudibara?
feature, yeah, nudibara that you talked about. That has the little fly trap where you touch it and it snaps shut. I've had it for years. Let's see, it's this one over here. So if people haven't seen these, let's see if I can see. It's too tiny, but basically, for those in the room, if you want to come see it, it's got it's always in flower. I've had this, I think I got it from Andy's. And I have a Dracula and a big Viciana I brought in. So we have a plant table here that we can start going through until Lynn's ready. Why don't we just go through the one here since I started? So this is my Mazdavalia Viciana. So it's a pretty big, relatively big plant. And it blooms all the time. And this Dracula, I'll do the Dracula while we're at it. This is a fairly fleshy Dracula Navarurama. So if you get it close, it's got the monkey face he's talking about. It's a little out of focus. But basically, it always has this flush of buds. It's a little out of focus. I don't know why. Anyway, but not as delicate as some. And Frag cardinale, so a non-pleurothalid, snuck its way in. And I brought in that Barcaria. We're going out of order here. I'm just doing the ones I know. This is from Adam Farrar. So Adam, our new vice president, is here. He's got a Maxillaria tenafolia, and this is I think it's called Yamada. It's a yellow form, and usually the typical form is red. Still smells like coconut. I think you got it from Cal Orchid at POE. They'll be back at Orchids in the Park. Let's see, next is, this is my Barcaria, spectabilis. These are relatively large for Barcaria flowers. And then this is a small, what is this one? This is a Philodota chinensis. It looks like I don't know much about it. Yeah, not the best picture quality tonight. I don't know what can we focus it? I don't know. All right. Okay, now we're into Bill Weaver brought in a forest of, let's see here, this is Sarcochilus. So we have, this one is Culnara kaleidoscope ring by full arch. This one is Sark Little Vladimir Bunyip by Shades. All right. We're all running around here. Oh, all right. This is Sark Culnara Roundup Purple by Maria Purple Dots. I know that one. And this yellow one, spotted gold. This one's Culnara Dip Spotted Gold by Wild something. I couldn't read it. He wrote them all out too. Panny. I can't read it. And is that it? Is there? Did we get all those? Oh, all right. So this is, who brought this one? Okay, Jeff, the good growing Jeff, GEOF. This is a white Maxillary Coccinia alba, beauty. Cattleya syncoranum ceruleum. Get a little closer. Just keep going in and then back away. Huh. With the app, it was doing better. Oh well. And then, wow, Cattleya syncorana, but a darker color form. I'm sure if they're fuzzy here, they're fuzzy there, right? And, oh, and this is from Vincent Pietro Martir. This is Odont. Wait, just hold still.
Can't hear you, Jeff.
Sorry, too many things to hold. Here, you do the plant focus. Try and get it in here. This says Adaglossum tarantula sweet orange. I haven't heard of Adaglossum, so Brassia hybrid. It's a really beautiful kind of deep orange, burnt orange color. Is that all the flowers? Okay. Oh, and then there's a nice pot that. So Jonathan Fong of our Potteriana, yeah. So Jonathan brought it in to. I don't think he actually brought it in for show and tell, but I put it up there. So yeah. So we want to encourage him. He's the artist that did our Orchid Masquerade poster, by the way. So thank you. All right, Lynn, are you
Ready, Jeff,
ready?
I'm ready whenever you want to share the screen with me.
I think you can just take over.
I've got it up on my screen. Can anybody see it?
No,
No.
nope. You don't have share screen yet.
Host. No. Okay. Yeah, we don't want to do that. Okay. Not sharing yet. That's us. We're all being quiet here, but are you pressing share screen? We don't see. Okay.
We're
we don't-
waiting with bated breath.
Me too.
Sorry, Lynn.
No, I'm trying to get to the share screen. I'm not seeing it on the bottom there. I'm hovering.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to adjust your screen. I had to scroll mine up a bit to get to the bottom.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Yeah. Doesn't want to scroll up.
You want to
Try
send?
using Alt-S.
What did that do?
Hopefully it's share screen.
Can you see my slides?
No, we don't see anything but you right now.
No.
Alt S as in share, right?
Yes. I know.
Okay, let me go get my expert. Hold on, I'm sorry.
All right, anyone know any jokes? No? Any announcements? Anyone want to buy raffle tickets for some of the beautiful Mazdavalias in the room? Actually, while we're on, folks online, if you are interested in being one of the winners of the Sunset Valley Orchid gift certificates, I can go ahead and get names. So just, let's see here.
I can't get it to show me the share.
Put it in the chat,
Hovering
like
around down
write
here.
your name in the chat if you, for SVO gift certificate, $20 gift certificate if you're interested. And I'll do the same here when we do the raffle.
So what we want to do here,
Here, there it is.
there you go.
What you just did.
Okay, so here's your share. And what you want to do
Share
is,
that one.
yeah, okay. So we want it, it's on screen too. Share. There you go.
Voila.
It should be up.
But I can't see my screen now.
Well, this is, let's minimize that, close that.
Wait, that's our screen.
And
Oh, there's your screen. Good, good.
okay. So we're screen sharing. There
We can see
go.
it, looks perfect.
Now you should be seeing the full screen version without
Yes.
any notes. Is that correct?
That's
Yes.
good.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Let's do let's change it. Did it change? Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks, sweetie.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Very nice.
Go on.
Diamond orchids. Wow.
Okay,
Okay. Do you want me to do this?
sure.
I can just do the presentation. All right. I'm going to close this one and open one up on the Union Pacific.
At the railroad. Thanks, sweetie. All righty, sorry, I don't know why I always get so boogered with that, but anyway. So how do I get rid of this?
If you have any trouble changing, Just use, click on these arrows if
I
for
did
any
this.
reason it doesn't.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's still lots in bloom. We have 42 orchids tonight, including a number of Pleurothallidae, 14 contributors. And let's get started. As always, the order in which I show them is the order in which I receive them, so no preferential treatment.
Excuse me, any Mazdavalia?
Yes, there are actually.
Oh, good.
Tom likes Mazdavalias. So we'll start with Deborah Val's Qualter's Mini Cattleya Hybrid. This is SLC Virginia Dickey by Potinara Spring Blaze. It's not been registered, but both of the parents are hybrids made by Fred Clark of Sunset Valley Orchids. So it's probably a safe bet that this little beautiful hybrid also came out of Sunset Valley. SVO has a lot of beautiful mini Cattleyas for sale. You may win one of the gift certificates tonight. Mini cats are excellent windowsill plants. They're small, they're colorful. They like average household conditions. The color of this one is really fabulous, Deborah. Thank you. Judy Carney shows us Lycaste consobrina. This is a charming little species with big 3-inch fragrant flowers. They smell lemony or peachy. Like a lot of Lycastes, this one is deciduous. You can see it has no leaves. When the leaves fall off in the fall, they leave a sharp, really sharp little spine or pricker on the top of the pseudobulb. The ones that do that are the ones that indicate that this Lycaste needs a hard winter rest. This Lycaste consobrina was found in Mexico in 1972 in a scrub forest on a rocky hill at 4,500 feet of elevation. So that tells us it wants filtered or diffused light, cool to intermediate temperatures, but this is not an outdoor grower in the Bay Area. It's thought to be closely related to Lycaste aromatica, which it looks a lot alike, but that's found in Guatemala. This is Judy's Angraecum equitans. Angraecum is a genus of about 230 species found throughout tropical Africa and the neighboring islands. And this little gem is found on Madagascar, growing as an epiphyte on the branches of moss and lichen-covered trees at about 6,550 feet on Mount Saratananya. The flower is about 2 inches wide. It has a long nectary or spur, which I think you can see in the photo, that can be up to 5 inches long. So the leaves you can see are very rigid, they're leathery, they're almost succulent. And that's so it can store enough moisture to withstand the very dry winters in its habitat, which we should replicate in cultivation, dry winters. I've read that equitans has a much lower light need than many other Angraecums, and they'll bloom with winter light levels as low as just 500 to 800 foot candles. This is Judy's Phalaenopsis wilsonii, where the plant tag actually says it may be Phalaenopsis hongkonensis. They're both found in Yunnan, China. They're very similar in plant and flower morphology, so I'm not sure which it is, but we can see from Judy's thumbnail just how tiny it is. The flowers are about maybe 1.5 inches. It's found at elevations from 2,500 to nearly 7,000 feet, so they can be grown intermediate to cool. As you can see, Judy's growing hers very successfully mounted. Phalaenopsis is a relatively small genus. There are only 83 species. Many of them are rarely seen in collections. Many of them are relatively difficult to grow. They can be fussy about conditions and water. So I just find it interesting how prevalent and popular the hybrids that we see everywhere, how those have become almost ubiquitous for their beauty, their variety, long-lasting flowers, and they're easy to grow. So that's a perfect example of what is known as hybrid vigor from many generations of successful hybridizing. This is Judy's Cattleya nobilior. This is a Brazilian bifoliate species, and isn't it lovely? According to IOSPE, which our speaker mentioned earlier, the area where it grows has a distinct wet and dry period, and it's quite hot. So a 5-month drier, not perfectly dry, but drier rest is recommended. It grows at elevations up to about 2,500 feet on rough bark trees, like Judy has it mounted here on a rough mount. Grows often at the edges of cliffs in full sun. The flowers are up to 5 inches across, and it's a small plant, only 4 or 5 inches tall. So this is a lot of flower for a small plant. While it probably can adapt to cooler temperatures, the description of its habitat is the ideal way to grow it. Nice, Judy. Dale Martin shows us Vanda curvifolia forma franksmithiana, which he says is a unique color form named for Frank Smith of Kroll Smith Orchids in Florida. Typical color form is bright orange to orangey red, which I show at the right. It used to be known as Ascocentrum curvifolium before the geneticists got together and lumped all the Ascocentrums into Vanda. This is a small plant. It's only 6 or 8 inches tall. It's found in Burma and Thailand, where they grow as epiphytes in deciduous forests. So when the trees deciduate in the winter, they get a lot of bright, indirect, diffuse light, and it prefers intermediate temperatures, brisk air movement up there in those treetops. Ascocentrums, which are still small Vandas, are really good windowsill plants for those of you looking for additions to your collection. This is Dale's Maxillaria Memoria Ben Berliner Yellow Cape. This is a primary hybrid of Variabilis by Tenuifolia. Tenuifolia is the one which smells like coconut or coppertone suntan lotion. And the clone Yellow Cape is the only award on this little charming little thing. Dale sends me a bunch of different photos to choose from, and I really like this one for the color and the spots. It needs only low light to medium light. It's happy in a wide range of temperatures, so many of these maxillarias like this one could be good windowsill candidates. This is Dale's Dendrobium uniflorum. It's called this because they have a single flower on each inflorescence. And the inflorescences arise at the nodes of mature pseudobulbs. You can see that they're kind of alternating coming out of the nodes of those pseudobulbs. The flowers are really displayed nicely at the tips of the leaves, out beyond the leaves. This plant is about 12 to 16 inches tall. It's found as an epiphyte or sometimes as a lithophyte on rocks in Southeast Asia, including in Malaya, where they grow at 3,000 to 5,000 feet and where clear days are rare. So it needs only low diffuse light. Intermediate temperatures, year-round water. And this is a really stunning photo. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but looking up here, just have to wonder if that's a mealybug. This is Dale's Paphiopedilum donvis chilum. This is also a primary hybrid. This is Paph concolor by Leucochilum. And the hybrid was just registered in 2015. It has no awards to date. It has really beautiful symmetry, and I think the striking color and the spotting would be really interesting to see this on the table for judging. I'd like to see it in person. Little hairs all along the edges. This is Tom Pickford's Lycastes Shonan beet variety Alba. This is a complex hybrid, as you can see, and Tom's had 8 flowers and 1 bud at the time he took this photo. He grows it in his cool greenhouse with nighttime temperatures into the low 40s. And as you can see, like most Lycastes, it's mostly deciduous, and it blooms before the new pseudobulbs and the new leaves emerge in the spring. Humid, shady conditions are required. Water and fertilizer while the plant is actively growing, much less water and fertilizer after the leaves begin to yellow and fall off in the autumn. These flowers are about 5 inches across, and they're so pristine. I barely dare to look at them in the greenhouse because I'm afraid they would bruise if I look too hard. Tom calls this his herd of Cattleya mossii. There's 3 plants here of mossii. The 2 in the front are semi-albas with deep rose color only in the lip. And the one in the back is an albiform, which means it has no anthocyanin or red pigment in the lip, just yellow. So alba doesn't mean it has no color. It could be green or yellow, but no red pigment to be considered an alba. Mossii was named after Mrs. Moss, an English orchid enthusiast in the 1800s. Nice to hear a woman being the namesake for a change. It's endemic to Venezuela. In fact, it's the national flower of Venezuela. And this is a unifoliate, 1 leaf per pseudobulb. It's warm to cool growing epiphyte found high in the canopy of dense forests at elevations from 2,400 to 5,400 feet. If you can imagine seeing these in the treetops. The flowers are 8 inches or more across, and they're fragrant. Some say it's lightly garlic scented. Tom grows these in his cool house, but they can do well intermediate as well because they do come from a wide variety of elevations. The common name is the Easter orchid because it reliably blooms for Easter. This is Tom's Laelia Jungiana variety Alba. Again, Alba doesn't mean no color. It means no anthocyanin or red pigment. This is a Brazilian species found with plants attached to trees that grow on the bottom of steep-sided rocky gulches, which always have at least a trickle of flowing water. So that tells us that good humidity is important. They prefer to be mounted. As you can see, Tom has it mounted. He just stuck it in a pot to hold it up. Mounting it makes sure the roots dry out after watering. And the plants in cultivation need a lot less water in winter, but they should not dry out completely. Once a bud initiates, getting any water on that bud or new growth can cause it to blast and die. And I know this from sad experience. This is a beautiful but finicky species, really rewarding when it's grown as well as Tom's. This is Tom's Dendrobium lindleyi, previously known as Dendrobium aggregatum. Dendrobium is the second largest genus with over 1,200 species, many of which look very similar. And this is a good example. If you look in the background of Tom's photo to the right, there's another little mounted dendrobium, which is Dendrobium jenkensii. The flowers are very similar, but the main difference is that jenkensii, the one in the background, has just one flower per inflorescence, while the lindleyi up in the front can have 15 or 20 more per on a single raceme. So it's not a branching, it's just a straight stem. Their needs are very similar. They both want a very hard, dry rest from about Thanksgiving to Valentine's Day. It's the easiest way to remember it, meaning no water at all. And then in about mid-February, give them a big dose of water and then keep watering. Within a couple of weeks, the inflorescences begin to emerge. So the deciduous nature of the trees in their habitat indicate that light should be very bright in winter, cool to intermediate temps. Larry Roberts shows us this very interesting Bulbophyllum thiorum, although he says the plant tag when he bought it from Tropical Exotic at POE 2 years ago said it was Bulbo treshii. A photo from the internet of treshii is to the right. Folks have told Larry that it's thiorum. Thiorum is a species which is only found in one national park in Malaysia and is now thought to be extinct in the wild. So it's important to protect this in cultivation. The lateral sepals, which is what the long yellow parts are about 5 inches long. And the rest of the flower parts, including the hinged lip, are up at the top. This is a miniature warm grower, and it's great to see it, Larry. El Presidente Jeff Harris shows us Dracula navarrorum. Navarro is an Ecuadorian orchid enthusiast, still extant. This little orchid is found in Western Ecuador at elevations around 5,700 feet. So it is a cool grower, best grown in low light conditions and kept moist. My experience with Draculas is that they're very easy to grow, but difficult to bloom. So it's super that Jeff has this lovely open flower and it looks like 4 or 5 more buds. If we look at the close-up of the little monkey face to the right, the eyes are actually the minute petals with a small hinged lip just below it. Jeff's Pleurothalis Octavioi. Octavio is a Colombian orchid collector, and his namesake flowers are found in Colombian cloud forests at elevations from about 4,500 to nearly 8,000 feet. So this is a cool grower, prime for San Francisco temperatures, if it's grown in the humid shade and kept moist. The little half-inch flowers arise from, as you can see, from the upper side at the base of the leaf. The flowers are non-recumbent, meaning the lip is uppermost rather than extending downward. If you like this little gem, you might want to check out the San Francisco Pleurothalid Alliance, which meets monthly, and they're a group which puts in that beautiful big Wardian case display at our POE each year to showcase their members orchids. Jeff shows us Restrepia falkenbergii, which our speaker showed on his presentation. Restrepia is a genus of 54 epiphytic species found from Mexico to northern Argentina, mostly on tree trunks and lower branches near rivers and streams, so that tells us it likes humidity. Falkenbergii is found at elevations from 3,200 to 6,500 feet. So it's a cool grower, also ideal for the Bay Area climate in a small pot, high humidity and shade. If you have space for these, I'm sure you have space for these charming little orchids. The flower is about 1 inch and it blooms off and on much of the year. It can grow outdoors protected here. Dave Hermeyer shows us Dendrobium linguiforme, an Australian species. Docrylia was carved out of Dendrobium, and I don't know which it's being currently called. The Baker notes on this say that the habitat is extremely varied. These plants may grow on rocks in full sun, in open forest, or on trees in the dense shade of rainforests. But under highlight, the leaves, if you look at the leaves here, under very bright highlight, the leaves have a red-purple blotch to them, and that makes them flower profusely, that bright light, just like Dave's is here. They grow from sea level to at least 3,600 feet. The leaves are very thick and leathery, almost succulent-like, which sustains them during a drier winter rest. I also read this species is often found in conjunction with ants, and it may benefit from the presence of ants. Interesting. This is Dave's Toadies bicolor. This is a spectacular blooming. It has really large flowers and lots of them. Bicolor is a species found primarily in Brazil, where they grow in regions ranging from the coastal mountains to subtropical rainforests from 1,600 to 3,000 feet. So intermediate temperatures are best. They are miniature plants. They grow equally well in pots or mounted. They're happiest with moderate shade and humidity, and they need less water after flowering, but not a true rest. Another great windowsill candidate. Isn't this charming? This is Dave Sarcochilus fitzgeraldii. This is a delightful little Australian species with 1.5 inch long-lasting waxy flowers. It's been used in over 900 hybrids because it is a reliable parent, and also for the characteristics it brings to the progeny, including floriferousness, as we can see here. It is found in the habitat as a lithophyte, or a rock dweller, in deep river valleys that are humid and wet. This can be a good outdoor grower in the Bay Area, and I find it blooms much better in my cool greenhouse than intermediate. So winter nighttime temperatures down into the low 40s are perfect. It grows well in shallow pots with fast draining medium and good air movement, as it does not like hot, stagnant conditions. This is also a great windowsill grower if you can provide a good temperature drop in the winter to stimulate flower initiation. This is Stuart Maneker's Cattleya ludomaniana. This is an albiform, which is strikingly white with just a tad of yellow in the throat. If you can see the ruffled margins on the petals and the lip, those are characteristic of ludomaniana. It was first described in 1858. It's a Venezuelan species found from sea level to only about 1,500 feet, so it is a warm grower. And it's unifoliate, meaning just one leaf on each pseudobulb. Therefore, it's a little bit easier to sustain than the fussy bifoliates. The bifoliates tend to pout and decline after repotting, I'm sure you've noticed. This plant is mid-sized. It's up to only about 16 inches tall, has 8-inch flowers. It has over 120 AOS awards and many more in Brazil and Germany, so it's a very prized orchid. This is Stuart's first blooming of it, and he says its fragrance fills the room each morning. Very nice. Stuart's Gastrochilus sororeus, previously known as Sacolabium calceolare. This is a miniature species from Borneo, Java, Sulawesi, where it is a warm to hot growing epiphyte, grows in bright indirect light. The close-up of the flower shows the elaborately fringed lip margin. Presumably those fringes wave in the breeze to attract the pollinator to come hither. It's very cute. This is Stuart's Renanthera memoria robin mussolino. This is actually an unregistered primary hybrid of two species, Renanthera imschudiana by Renanthera bella, both of which are native to Southeast Asia, and both are warm growers. This hybrid can take high light to partial sun, and it should be fed heavily, full strength, weekly, while it's actively growing, but much less during the cooler months. The flowers are long lasting, and they just light up like little lanterns. They're so brightly colored. Stuart sent me a number of individual orchid photos, but we Wanted to share this shot of his orchid wall, which he took in March. This is a lovely array of Phalaenopsis. I see a Leptodes to the right, Dendrochilums up at the top. They're ferns and just really beautifully grown plants. So if you want to know more about Stuart's orchid wall, please chat or email Stuart, or maybe we can get him to do a little mini talk on them. Roberta Fox shows us Diplocolobium stelliferum. Diplocolobium differs from Dendrobium, which the flowers do resemble, in that Diplocolobium has just one-leafed pseudobulbs, and it has, quote, axillary, solitary, ephemeral flowers. So most members of the genus have flowers that last less than a day. Blink and you miss them. But Roberta says the flowers on this species last for about 5 days. This is native to New Guinea, and J. Fowles IOSPE describes it as warm growing, but Roberta, excuse me, has it growing in Southern California on a patio where it does occasionally experience winter chill down to 40. This is beautifully grown, beautifully flowered. Roberta's Renanthera, this is Pulchella. There's very little information available on this species, but IOSPE says that it is a hot growing epiphyte from Myanmar. If this has lived and thrived on Roberta's patio for nearly 6 years and has bloomed each of the last 5 years. So clearly hot is not a full requirement because it does get cooler than that on her patio. This is relatively small for the genus Renanthera. The plant's only about 6 inches. The inflorescence is about 12 inches. And the flowers are about 2 inches high. This is Roberta Zootrophion alvaroi. Again, our speaker talked about Zootrophion being in the Pleurothalid Alliance. This is native to Colombia and Ecuador at elevations from 1,300 to about 2,000 feet. It grows in her greenhouse, intermediate greenhouse, in a 3-inch pot. You can see the flowers open just a crack. We can see that in the left-hand photo. So the pollinator must be something really very tiny to squeeze in there to do his job. They look to Roberta like little balloons or maybe lanterns. It can produce a flush bloom 2 or 3 times a year, produces a few flowers almost any time it feels like it. And this is Roberta's Dryadella zebrina. Dryadella is a genus of 57 species, which were carved out of Mazdavalia in 1978. Zebrina suggests zebra, although I see spots rather than zebra stripes on these flowers. This is a species native to Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, at elevations from 1,500 to 3,400 meters. So that's a pretty high elevation plant. It's cool growing miniature. It grows shady and damp on Roberta's patio. The flowers are not dramatic in color, but they're very interestingly marked. And it certainly has a very favorable ratio of flowers to plant. Very cute. Deborah Vels Qualter shows us 3 of her favorite cymbidiums. She didn't get the names from the plants because she did not want to disturb the flowers. The first is a green flower with a beautiful white and burgundy decorated lip and bright yellow keels to attract the pollinator inside. And this wide creamy pastel cymbidium has peachy margins on the lip. Deborah says she has no black spots on her orchids this year. Those spots are botrytis and they're caused by lingering moisture. So we haven't had a lot of moisture this year because we've had infrequent rainstorms, and the cymbidiums are looking nice and clean because of it. And this is my favorite one of Deborah's. I am partial to pink cymbidiums. This one has lots of flowers, which looks like they're just starting to open up. The pink contrasts really nicely with the white lip and the burgundy spots. More lovely cymbidiums from Andrea Lodate. She's growing these outdoors in her outdoor bathtub, which is a cool idea. Andrea says she decided to make a Mother's Day arrangement for her kitchen honoring her mom and her grandma. This was her grandma's vase. The vase looks like a cornucopia and it is overflowing. Andrea says most of the non-orchid flowers in the bouquet are also from her garden. I have a little sip here, excuse me. Susan Anderson shows us Ascocentrum garryi. There were 13 nice compact little species in the genus Ascocentrum, which have now been lumped into Vanda. Ascocentrums with their dense clumps of small flowers were often crossed with Vandas, and that created the man-made genus Ascocenda. Again, they've all been lumped into Vanda. At any rate, they prefer to grow in slat baskets with little or no medium around the roots. This is how they grow in their habitat, with their roots, air roots hanging free. Garryi is native to Thailand and Malaya at low elevations. Susan grows this very well in her intermediate greenhouse with minimum winter temperatures around 58 degrees. It likes bright, light, even watering and fertilizer year round. Susan's Dendrobium terenganuensis. This was formerly known as Dendrobium rosslii because it was first described in 2007 by Rossley Zakaria of Malaysia, where it is found in primary forests on branches of trees, low altitudes below 1,000 feet, which tells us it's a warm growing. It deciduates in the fall, and then it blooms on leafless canes, as we can see here. J. Fowles IOSPE says the flowers change from lime green to lemon yellow 3 or 4 days after they open. The close-up of the central flower shows the fabulously hairy fringe on the lip. I love that. This is Susan's Bulbophyllum falcatum standing tall, which she has grown well for a number of years in a shallow bowl, which she places near her water wall for the humidity it brings. It has about 25 inflorescences this year, and each inflorescence has 20 to 25 tiny flowers in perfect little rows on either side of the rachis, or the stem. The clone standing tall was awarded an AM AOS in 1995 in Southern California. And since then, Anna Chai and Gold Country orchids have received numerous awards on falcatum. This is a species from tropical West Africa. It's a warm growing epiphyte. This is Susan's Dendrobium vasellii. This is a cute small species found only on the Cape York Peninsula in Queensland, Australia, as an epiphyte on the trunks of trees at the edge of rainforests, generally below 1,500 feet. So it's a warm, humid grower. As you can see, the plant creeps and rambles, so it can be mounted on cork, or like Susan grows it here in a large flat basket where it can hang over the sides. Although the rhizomes are fairly flexible, so it is possible to carefully, gently bend them to grow back inside the basket rather than taking off into the ionosphere. The flowers are about an inch, but with 30 or 40 more on a spike, they make just clouds of creamy white above the 3-inch fleshy leaves. Alan Koch of Gold Country often has these available. Tanya Lamb shows us Vanda christiansoniana, another little gem which used to be Ascocentrum christiansonianum. Last month, Tanya's plant was awarded an AM, an Award of Merit, by the AOS, and Tanya was awarded a CCM, the Certificate of Cultural Merit. This is a cultural award which goes to the grower rather than to the flower quality. So congratulations, applause for Tanya on this. The species was named to honor Eric Christensen, who many of us in the Bay Area knew. And he was also a well-renowned orchidist and researcher before he passed. This is a small sympodial epiphyte, native to Vietnam, from sea level to about 2,500 feet of elevation. So it's a warm grower. It needs bright light to bloom as well as Tanya's. And the flowers are just over ½ an inch. Again, well done, Tanya. This is my Bifrenaria tyrianthina. Bifrenaria is a genus of about 20 species, and generally the only one we see in collections is Bifrenaria harrisonii. This Bifrenaria tyrianthina is a Brazilian species found at elevations from 3,500 to nearly 7,000 feet. J. Fowles IOSPE says it's cool growing epiphyte in an area with a distinct dry winter season. The flower is about 3 inches, and I tried to capture the complexity of the lip on the left with its purple stripes and orange callus and lots of little hairs. Those little hairs either deter something or they wave in the breeze to attract a pollinator. So the other reason for showing you this Bifrenaria This is kind of a little mini skill session. I bought 2 of the same plant online from AWZ Orchids in September of 2020, so about 18 months ago. The plants were nearly identical. They each had 3 pseudobulbs. I researched and learned that it's a Brazilian species found up to 6,500 feet of elevation with average minimum temperatures of 46 or 47 degrees for 3 winter months, which you can see in the little chart on the left that I pulled from Orchid Whiz. So I decided to do a little experiment. I put 1 plant in my cool greenhouse with nights into the low 40s. And that's a greenhouse that I share with Tom Pickford and Bolinas. The other plant I put in the intermediate greenhouse with minimum temperatures of 58. That's the one I share with Susan Anderson and Bolinas. So you can see the results 1.5 years later. The closer plant has been grown in the intermediate greenhouse and it's not so happy. It has 3 viable pseudobulbs and 1 brown pseudobulb that's just barely peeking out in the back. I don't know if you can see it. And it has no new growths appearing yet this spring. The one on the right that has been grown in the cool house is nearly 3 times larger, with the newer pseudobulbs are larger than the original ones, which is what we want, right? And it has a flower spike. It has 3 new growths that are about 3 inches tall. You can see one sticking up behind the white root, which is growing out of the pot. So you may wonder why I always give elevation information and I go on and on about temperatures and habitat. Those are important clues about growing them in our collections. It is true that orchids are adaptable, and the little plant on the left may catch up over time if I move it to the cool house, or it may not. But as Judy Carney says, we don't want them to survive, we want them to thrive, like the one on the right, which is the one I gave the preferable growing conditions. So there's just a little tip for you. And since I received no pet parade photos this month, here's one that I took last week in South Carolina in an old plantation where my sister and family took me for dinner. A gator in the clover. So that's it for tonight. Thank you all very much for sending me photos. See you next month.
Great job, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you. Stop share.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you as always. Any questions for Lynn in the room? No. And we have a new member. I want to welcome you. Want to introduce yourself? Say hello. Lenny. Welcome, Lenny. All right. Well, we're going to sign off and do the raffle. If there's anyone else that wants to get a Sunset Valley Orchid gift certificate online, write your name in the chat. And we're going to shut that down and finish up the raffle in the room.
Thank you,
Bye,
Jeff.
everyone.